Hey, what's good everyone? Keeping in line with our most popular video, we'll be reviewing an indie gem today. If you enjoy this sort of content, please hit that like button and subscribe. Sheepo, the self-described Metroidvania, is in reality a platformer with puzzle elements more reminiscent of World of Goo than anything else. Although the controls are too loose for such a fast-paced game, they feel simple and natural. In fact, the game only utilizes 4 buttons and the left joystick on the Switch. One of those buttons is to access the menu, while the other lets you transform back to Sheepo's base form prematurely, and I almost never used it. As such, you only ever use the A and B buttons and move with the joystick. It's extremely simplified and easy, while also relying on timing and input sensitivity to make true mastery of movement through the levels feel like a skill. It's easy to perform a double jump, but much more difficult to time it right to extend that jump far enough to reach a ledge to a hidden area. It's not the best feeling movement I've experienced in any game, and at first I wished jumping would be mapped to the A button instead of the B button, but I got used to it and it got the job done. 3 out of 5. The main gimmick of the game is your ability to shapeshift into any creature whose egg you've collected, as long as you're also near one of those creatures. This is done with the press of the A button. Although technically this is a single mechanic, there's enough variation in your abilities once transformed between all of the different creatures that it never feels lacking in diversity over the short course of the game. Unfortunately, every time you encounter one of these creatures, they are in an area that specifically requires you to have harnessed their power in order to either progress or collect a feather. This means you're only ever using these abilities when they're required, except for one, which we'll get into later, and another, which essentially unlocks quick teleport about midway through the game. All of the abilities present you with a new method of movement, but feel unique because of how important the flow of movement is in Sheepo. In some ways, it may even be similar to a rhythm game like Patapon. Regardless, the mechanics and gimmicks aren't revolutionary, but it's plenty for what the game is. 3 out of 5. Each area of the world feels unique, both in terms of visual and mechanical design. Within the deep woods, you'll often find yourself avoiding spinning saw blades. In the destroyed high-rise that is Dead Mall, you'll be using massive fans to shoot skyward. Each area presents you with obstacles relevant to what the area actually is. As you progress, each new area you unlock presents more difficult platforming challenges that also utilize more of the abilities you've picked up along the way. The only issue I have with level design is that the boss fights only ever force you to jump and rarely even let you use any of your shapeshifting abilities. This feels like a missed opportunity, especially considering how well the world is designed otherwise. Nevertheless, level design deserves a 4 out of 5. The game runs remarkably well for something developed by one man. In my 2 playthroughs, I only encountered 2 glitches, both of which were minor and I could not replicate again. In one instance, I jumped too low, yet Sheepo somehow climbed up onto the ledge. In the other, I fell onto spikes on the ground and then jumped off of them a second later, having taken no damage. Considering the entire game is a puzzle platformer, I don't think that's a big deal. While in the deep woods, it also feels like there's a drop in frame rate while burrowing with the deadworm ability and also just running around. I'm not sure if the game just has a problem rendering that area or if it's intentional. However, again, this is a minor issue that only happens in one room of the deep woods and doesn't impact gameplay at all. 4 out of 5. Sheepo has 3 difficulty settings. On my first playthrough I beat the game on normal, and on my second playthrough on hard. Aside from boss battles being tougher, there are also less save points in the world with increased difficulty. I was a little disappointed that the platforming wasn't any more difficult on hard, but it wouldn't make much sense. There's a mix of static and moving platforms in the levels, so it would really destroy the flow of the game if part of the level became significantly harder on hard when compared to the easy setting, and the rest of the level stayed exactly the same. I found the normal setting a bit of a challenge, which I appreciated. I am not big on Metroidvanias though, so it could just be my lack of familiarity with the sort of gameplay. The hard difficulty forced me to attempt some of the boss battles 10 or 15 times before I beat them. Overall, I like that there's multiple difficulty options and how difficult the game actually is at each of them. 4 out of 5. Sheepo is a visually relaxing game. The setting is surreal and calming, however the textures fall short even for an indie game. Outside of a few conveyor belt platforms, all of the ground and inaccessible space is just a solid shade of black. Aside from the art installations at the gallery, the set pieces and objects in the foreground feel flat and made from the same exact material. On the other hand, The backgrounds are all well done, and the particle effects present add to the uniqueness of each area. It has to do with the art style the developer was going for, but it still doesn't make up for the overall lackluster textures, and as such, they deserve a 2 out of 5. The overall art style is amazing. Once again, it reminds me of World of Goo, if World of Goo took place in outer space. It's cute, charming, fantastical, and most importantly, adds to the story. As you progress, you begin to appreciate that even the parts of the world that have been long forgotten by its inhabitants are more beautiful for it. Nothing more to say. 5 out of 5. The lighting only changes in the underbelly. Outside of that area, it remains constant throughout and only visible in the background. It adds to the ambiance of each region, complementing it well. It's fine, but doesn't give me much to talk about. 3 out of 5. I really enjoyed my time with Sheepo. The characters in particular seemed so innocent and pure that even having a conversation with a talking bird who sold your work of art for 12 million feathers and gave you 200 because he was feeling charitable brought a smile to my face. It was also really satisfying beating one of the bosses that gave me some trouble, as it really felt like I was just that good and not that I made it out by chance. The post-game content really impressed me as well, but maybe because I wasn't expecting the game to have any at all. The game just makes you feel warm on the inside, but because of how short it is, there's only so many moments that will stick with you. Still, it deserves a solid 3 out of 5. On the other hand, we have frustrating moments. There were only a handful of those, and mostly during my hard difficulty playthrough. The Grapple Gang and Slime Queen battles get ridiculously frustrating on hard. The Grapple Gang requires you to do some extremely precise jumping, which becomes a bit of a problem with the controls being on the loose end. The Slime Queen was just frustrating because of the annoying noise she makes with every attack she throws at you. The loud and obnoxious sound you hear every time you take damage is also frustrating, but you can turn that down in the settings. Some of the backtracking is a little frustrating as well, but I suppose that's par for the course with a Metroidvania, and probably wouldn't bother fans of the genre as much as it did me. Overall, still less frustrating moments than I'd probably find in a much larger scale game, and as such, also deserving of a 3 out of 5. The story is told more through the world itself than actual exposition, and in Sheepo's case, it's a welcome choice. The little exposition that does exist happens at just the right time as to not break up the flow of the game. The opening scene throws you right into the tutorial and introduces you to Cynthia, with whom you will communicate throughout your journey via walkie-talkie. Afterwards, you meet a few characters along the way who basically enlist your help and through which you learn more about the world to which you've just arrived. The entire story is that you've just joined a massive organization whose goal is to collect and store the genetic information of all species in the universe in order to prevent them from dying out. You then arrive on a planet that is dying and are tasked with collecting eggs from the 6 species living on the planet. Simple enough, but then you begin to draw parallels between the dominant life forms of the planet and humanity. This of course is all related to the story, but driven through the environments and characters more than some concrete narrative. The pacing is also great. As the story is told mostly through the world, the pacing is totally linked to the gameplay, and thus stays even throughout, deserving a 4 out of 5. Aside from the game's namesake and Cynthia, all other characters are nameless, unless you consider the Beast a full name. Despite this, they are all remarkably well written. Cynthia is the comic relief and also reaffirms what you're thinking right before a boss fight. She's snarky and a little selfish, but her intentions are good and she seems true to herself. This works perfectly as Sheepo is another silent protagonist. Normally I'd be complaining about that as well, but it's not that big of a deal in this game as you don't get a better understanding for the world through dialogue. Similarly to Cynthia, the artist is also kind of arrogant and selfish, but somehow genuine in every interaction. There's minor characters like a game show host or a guy who asks you to find his brother in the deep woods. All of these characters are stuck in their own lives, which you rightfully have no clue about as you've just dropped onto their planet. The fact that these characters look and sound like they belong in this world is amazing given how little they say. You come to realize that they are as oblivious to how their society has managed to slowly destroy Sebron, their planet, as humanity is. You slowly begin to feel sad for these characters and the fact that they are living on borrowed time, having done the same deeds that are leading our society to the brink, being just as oblivious about them and yet showing enough kindness to not deserve their fate. It's not perfect character development, but it's an amazingly well executed balancing act, deserving a 4 out of 5. The environments expand your understanding of what's going on in the game the same way the characters do. You see the decay and destruction happening in different parts of the world, and that all leads you to conclude why you've been sent to Sebron in the first place. There are sawmills, there's plenty of waste being improperly disposed of, there's the steel skeletons of buildings long forgotten rotting away like the planet. You see the lack of fauna and flora in certain environments that has not yet spread to the others, all signs we can relate to based on trends we see in the real world. Beyond the negative implications, you find beautiful environments still untouched by the inhabitants of the world. There's beautiful viewpoints and virgin lands used as a place of solace by the few inhabitants of Sebron trying to escape the destructive cycle they find themselves in. It's a juxtaposition of where they were, where they find themselves, and where they are headed, that paints an overall somber picture of the surreal beauty of Sebron and the world of Sheepo, deserving a 4 out of 5. The music is also very fitting and once again reminds me of the soundtrack of World of Goo, despite being totally different from it. Eric Thompson really did a great job in making sure the arrangements make each environment feel sonically endearing and welcoming. There isn't a single track that feels weak, let alone one that I disliked. My only quip is how few tracks actually make up the soundtrack, and as such, I have to give it a 4 out of 5. Given the lack of exposition, it's difficult to find loopholes and inconsistencies. The only major plot hole is the fact that you're sent to an uncharted planet, yet clearly there is an advanced civilization already occupying it, and clearly there must have been some way for the organization that sent you to have determined the planet was dying. How did they also determine the number of species that need to be cataloged on Sebron? It also doesn't make much sense that after the final battle with the Beast, she already has one egg waiting for you in the next room. Beyond that, there isn't anything inconsistent with your abilities or even something as simple as the world design. The fact that the predominant race is avian justifies the platforming you have to do as the sheep thing that you are. The world's lost consistency deserves a 4 out of 5. Unfortunately, there isn't quite as much replay value for Sheepo on the Switch as there is on other consoles. The PlayStation version has time-sensitive trophies which warrant multiple playthroughs for the Platinum. The length of the game is also absurdly short, at only about 4 to 5 hours for a casual player on normal. On my second playthrough on hard, I was able to beat the game with an 82% completion rate in under 2 hours. The length may actually be a reason to replay the game as it's so short you can finish it in a single sitting, as opposed to having to dedicate days or even weeks to play another game. So there's at least some replay value for people with little free time. I also have to judge that 5-hour playtime against a $10 cost, so this metric deserves a 2 out of 5. On the other hand, the post-game content is downright astounding. I always rage about this metric when it comes to massive first-party releases, based on how often post-game content is non-existent. To actually have solid post-game content in a $10 indie game should put big-name developers to shame. Following the final battle, if you've collected all feathers and found all the health expansions, you unlock shifter wings, which allow you to shapeshift into your bird form ad nauseum for 2 minutes at a time. It might seem small, but it allows you to travel throughout the entire world much more effectively and even gives you access to a few areas you were previously unable to reach. This also comes with a quick mission to find 5 photographs around the world, which then unlocks some spectacular content that I'll cover in the extras. It's a really nice touch that was totally unnecessary, but the developer went ahead and put it in the game anyways. This deserves a perfect 5 out of 5. The collectibles are adequate. You have the feathers, of which there's at least 60 or 70. These present a nice challenge as sometimes you find yourself doing some dangerous platforming to reach them, and if you die before reaching a save point, you lose the feathers and have to go collect them again. There's also the health expansions, of which there are a total of 6, and collecting all allow you to take 2 extra hits before dying. Finally, there are the photographs you have to collect post-game. It's a fair amount of collectibles, warranting a 3 out of 5. Unfortunately, there's almost nothing in the way of challenges and minigames. There's one pinball-style game show, which rewards you with a feather. It doesn't have any replay value though, so I find it hard to classify as a true minigame. Similarly, there is one optional boss fight, but it's also for some feathers and in no way as challenging as all the main bosses. It's also easy to mistake this side boss for one necessary to progress in the game. It's really difficult for me to classify these two as challenges and minigames, but in theory, that's the only classification they fit, and as such, I'll give this metric a 1 out of 5. Finally, the extras. There's a shop in Deadmall where you can buy a more advanced version of the map with feathers. There's also two very helpful characters, one which gives hints on how to progress, and one which marks all feather locations on your map once you speak with him. The game also tracks your completion rate and time played, although I had a massive issue with the latter. I had put my Switch to sleep and yet the game kept counting playtime. My first playthrough ended up taking over 11 hours, even though I only played the game for about 4 of those hours. Nevertheless, not every game still tracks playtime and completion, so that's nice. The best extra though is the foreshadowing of future DLC upon the full completion of the game, along with the final quest to find the photographs. It's amazing to even think that a $10 game might get some future content added to it. But then again, look at Pokemon Go. This is pretty cool and overall well done, deserving a 3 out of 5. Despite some shortcomings, mostly due to its low budget nature, its quirkiness, charm, and surprisingly deep social commentary really make Sheepo one of the better games I've played recently. If you haven't yet, go buy it, and support Kyle and Eric Thompson, the men behind this gem. If you haven't yet, hit that like button and subscribe, and support me for more indie game reviews. And until next time, peace!